Hello there, I'm your moderator, Sage Goodwin, and as always, I'm joined by Samit Automate All the Things Halvadia and the Swedish security Superman, Simon Binder?
Yeah, that's the good thing about my surname, because you can say it in any language and it works. It's
Excellent.
actually Austrian from the beginning, but in Sweden it's usually Binder. But
Binder.
Binder works as well in English.
How are you both doing today?
Great.
Yeah.
I've been looking forward to this, and really nice to meet you. And we have beautiful winter weather in Sweden, so I'm happy.
You know, that's the thing. You can just sense the difference between the Europeans and like the Americans. You ask me, and I'm based in Chicago, or you ask a New Yorker, and they're gonna be like, "Dude, it's winter. It's brutal, right?" And then you have Simon here in Sweden talking about the fact that he's got lovely winter weather. I mean, that positive outlook is just such a Nordic trait that doesn't exist. I mean, we're pretty good folks in the Midwest of the U.S., but we're certainly not as a rose-colored lens, should I say, about our winter weather as you guys are.
Here in Colorado,
that's awesome.
Everyone hates the winter. I personally love it. So I'm out there in the snow, like living my ultimate like Viking life, and everyone else is like bundled up and they're like, "Oh, this sucks." And I'm like, "We've only gotten 2 days of snow this year. Like, come on, it's okay."
Enjoy it. Enjoy it.
Yes, but today we're going to be covering a variety of topics. We're going to be talking about Simon's history in the space, the importance of security, as well as physical endpoints versus EUC, and then SCCM and Intune in 2024, because I think that's going to be an interesting topic. First off, how did you get in this space? We're going to get into this a little bit as well, talking about AVD Tech Fest, but let's go a little bit beyond that too, and let's talk about some of the ways that you got into the space.
So I've been an IT consultant my entire life. I did 1 year in a call center just after I finished school, and that is still a year that I highly value. I learned so much from working in a call center for 1 year that I still use it every single day. But since then, I've always been a consultant. I've always been focused on physical endpoints. So I started off in config manager, doing application packaging for many years. And then I actually 2 or 3 days ago got a OneDrive message saying, "Look at what you did this date X amount of years ago." And 12 or 11 years ago, I did my first, what was then called Windows Intune implementation. So I had screenshots of the old Silverlight portal. So I've been following Intune since the very early start. And I eventually became a Microsoft MVP within Microsoft Intune in 2018. And by that time, I've always, to some extent, also worked with Citrix, because my Citrix colleagues always came to me and asked, like, "Could you do our GPOs?" And I'm a very odd person, so I love GPOs and troubleshoot GPOs and things like that. So I've always done that from an EUC point of view. But then almost by mistake, I was invited to Agile Disrupt in 2019, it must have been. And they asked me, "Could you speak about this WVD thing?" And yeah, sure. I've heard about it. So I pulled some strings and got access to like a private preview build or setup of WVD. And I was the second person outside of Microsoft that were allowed to present WVD on stage.
Oh, wow.
That's very cool.
Yeah. So it's Frick Pearson were first, and then myself. And I think I had every single person at Disrupt joining my session. So I did it twice in 2 days. And that was really my introduction to the EUC community as a whole. So before that, I knew some things, but from that point on, I've had a great time being part of the EUC community. And we'll get into that later on, combining what I know from physical endpoints with the virtual endpoints that we have today. And from there, I've met so many great partners that I love to work with, so many great people, and it's taken me to places I never expected to be at just 4 or 5 years ago. That's how I ended up in the EUC community, but I've always been part of the digital workplace community as such.
Yeah, it's interesting, Simon, because you might be a pioneer. You might have started being a pioneer without really realizing it. Although I'd like to put myself in this category too, right?
I think you've earned that.
Well, we've started on the packaging and endpoint side, right? Because, with Admin Studio, I ran product management for Admin Studio and Install Shield. That's where I think where we might have first met. But the reality is like that's really targeted towards that physical endpoint world. And only after AppDNA, when I made my way into Citrix, did I become a rogue fringe member of the EUC society, but always with the application first lens, So it's quite funny because now it's actually happening in mass. And I've talked about this a couple of times, and it's happening in mass because there's 7 physical endpoint admins to every one EUC admin that exists, right? Because that ratio just makes sense in terms of the 1.4 billion managed devices versus 200 million devices that you have for EUC. But it wasn't really they were 2 distinct communities until we started seeing Scott Manchester from Microsoft launching AVD, which was Cloud VDI, and Cloud PC with Windows 365, that you're starting to see those 2 communities kind of blend. So, I'm going to remind Scott when I see him in Punta Cana at NerdioCon, I'm going to remind him that Simon and I were the pioneers of bringing physical and EUC together.
Please do that.
So we have this background going through. You get kind of swept into the EUC space a little bit, unbeknownst to you almost. Where does AVD Tech Fest come into this?
So that is actually a quite fun story as well. So can't remember how many years that is now. It must have been beginning of COVID.
Which was like 17 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
or 12 months. I don't know. You can tell me either.
Exactly. It's so true. No one knows when it started. No one knows
how long
if
it lasted.
It ever finished. Exactly. So at that point, I felt that I had some time over that I wanted to spend doing something good. So I went out on Twitter. It will never be named X.
I'm with you there as well.
Yeah. And said that I'm happy to mentor people. So if anyone would like me as a mentor, I'm happy to invest my time if you're willing to invest your interest and learn what you want and what you can from me. And at that point, Patrick Köhler, the brain behind AVD TechFest, reached out to me and asked, would you mind mentoring me? And we started to meet up like once per week. And I've had other mentees as well, which every single time has been so valuable to me. And it's been fascinating to see how these individuals are grown. Due to themselves. I've only been there to like help them understand what they already had inside of them. So I helped Patrick with everything from like learning Intune to like coaching him in his career. And then we started to talk about like, should we do something together when we finally can meet? And one day he came up because he is a rock fan. So he's been going to Wacken in Germany. It's a huge rock festival. And he was like, could we do something like that, but for EUC? And yeah, sure. I think that is what you should strive for when you do an event, that everyone should be happy, everyone should be engaged. So that was like the proposition we had. Let's do something. So we started off with WVD Tech Fest, a few virtual ones, which were great. And we were fortunate enough to be supported by some great partners and of course a lot of really good speakers, because that's also been our core, that it should be the best speakers talking about the most interesting topics. And then 2 years ago, we said that, okay, now it's time to do physical events. So we started off in Amsterdam after having to postpone it once due to COVID not being over the first time. So we did the first one in Amsterdam, the second one in Edinburgh. I can't disclose anything for 2024, but stay tuned. Something might happen.
I do believe we did do the in-person one with you, Simon. That was a lot of fun in Amsterdam. Especially for the first event, that was extremely well attended, but not only well attended, it was fairly well engaged, right? That's the tough thing, being able to balance that. I don't know whether it was because people finally were able to get on planes again and see each other, or but I think all the signs pointed to this is going to end up being a great event, a great forum, and I think it's continued to carry that flag forward.
So it's been great fun, and me and Patrick is really happy where we got this, and especially like everyone that have been there have been super happy, and that was our goal. And I think all the amazing sponsors we have had, including Rimo3, have like really ensured that we could have the success that's been. So we are very grateful for that, and it's been great fun to work with Patrick on it. And it was actually on AVD Tech Fest. That was the first time we met in person. So it was quite fun because our event team were based in the UK. So I was in Sweden, Patrick were in Germany, our events team were in the UK, and we arranged a conference in the Netherlands. That was challenging, but it turned out very, very well.
And just out of curiosity, just from your perspective, because it is a community, right? Whether it's physical or EUC, let's call it endpoint management as a broad term, right? Endpoint management is a community, so I love that engagement in terms of the mentor mentee. We had a similar program, obviously, at Citrix, where we bring people under. One thing that's always kind of stood out with all the engagement that you do inside of that community is you've never worked for an ISV. It's always been either a consultant or it's been doing a role inside of IT, but it's never been on the ISV side. Any thoughts as to direction that you've chosen? You don't want to be tied to a vendor. You want to solve real problems. I mean, what's kind of led that, or has that just been by chance?
So I'm probably odd for my generation, but I really want to have a relationship with the employer I'm at. And it's always been like, I'm a people person. I, for one, couldn't wait to get back to the office. So I have a fantastic home office, but I'm rarely here because I'm rather at an office or out traveling. But I do think like one of the kindest things that have been said about me is that I'm an IT artist. Something like I see myself as an artist when it comes to IT. I want to create something that people appreciate. That's something that's beautiful, something that like have harmony if you talk in musical terms. And I do think that I've been able to do that in a very good way being a consultant. So I'm very passionate about combining different partners. I've never been like a super strict Microsoft only person. It's always been Microsoft as a base, but then you have a fantastic partner ecosystem that you can use to build something even more beautiful. And I think that's why I've always been a consultant. And I do think that what's working for me. That being said, I love to work with the product groups at Microsoft. I think that's the most valuable thing I get as an MVP to see things and be part of really changing the product going forward. So at some point, I'm sure that I will try the ISV side of it. And it would actually be fun to be a customer at one point too, but we'll see about that. But I've been fortunate to have mostly great managers. I've been on some really interesting opportunities in the employers I've had. And it's always been, I want to create something beautiful with a team that I really can work together with, and where I'm able to combine the technologies I believe in.
Well, I think it's great, right? I mean, you are solving a problem, you are creating an outcome, a masterpiece, whatever you want to call it, right? I think and I'm just always genuinely curious when I see folks like you. I've been the other way, right? I go deep into one space, which is just around applications and Windows applications and app lifecycle management, and trying to solve that one specific problem through software, whereas you're kind of looking at the end-to-end deliverable. It's just interesting to me when we have these types of conversations to see the other approach, right?
Absolutely. And I think at one point I worked as a competence area developer at my former employer. So I was responsible for the digital workplace development of the consultants that were my colleagues. And at one point, one of my peers that managed another part of the offering, I think it was data center or something, said, like, we want to build an experts program, but we can't have solution architects in that because they do too many things. And I was like, okay. So then you want to throw me out. And then they obviously said that, no, you can stay. But our other architects are not allowed. So it's like, we do very different things. We have different skill sets. Some are really good at focusing on one thing and do that extremely well. And I like to tie things together and see how everything works out.
The Lego builder. And
I think we need both. Yeah. Exactly. Don't get into Lego because then we'll get stuck there. I have, I've actually just behind me, I've just finished a year-long build. I got the world map in Lego last Christmas. Wow. And it's 11,500 pieces, one by one.
Gosh.
So it's like it's taken ages.
That's
but
amazing.
now it's done.
That is just absolutely amazing.
That's awesome. I've been itching to get into Lego, but I'm scared because it's a slippery slope, and I'm not sure if I want to go down. I don't have a ton of space to store the Lego, so I'm like, I don't know if I want to go down this dark and mysterious path that I might not be able to get back off of.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned art, and
Mhm.
I think it was at the South Coast Summit you had the
Mhm.
art of security, and I really like this quote
Yes.
that you had that you brought up in your presentation of "We are not at war, but we are not at peace." And I
Mhm.
really like that as you put it in this wrapper of security in the cloud and the technology space that we're in. I was just
Yeah.
talking to someone yesterday who was working in the security space, and the company
Mhm.
that he worked for was focused around on-prem environments, and they're just
Mhm.
now moving to the cloud. And he's like, dude, we're getting attacked from every single angle,
Yeah.
and I don't know what to do. So I want to go into
Mhm.
this and look at it from mostly your perspective, going from
Yeah.
the physical endpoints and this journey that you've been going, working in the cloud,
Mhm.
working outside of the cloud. What is that like now, especially in this wrapper of we're not at war, but we're not really at peace either?
Oh, where to start? First and foremost, it's one of the sessions I really enjoy to deliver because, like,
I could
it's
tell it
based
was really
on,
fun to watch.
yeah. So it's based on The Art of War by Sun Tzu, and if
Sure.
you haven't read it, I can highly recommend reading it because you can learn so much about really any aspect of life from it. It's a lot of really good quotes in it. But I do think, and this really goes back to everything that's happening in the world, where we are in a gray zone of if a country attacks another country by using cyber, or if they have advanced attack groups that are working for a state and attacks a company in another country. Is that an act of war or not? And I think that is like the context we need to be very aware of when we work with security, that the opponent or the attacker might actually be another country, which sounds scary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But that's what we need to prepare for, regardless of if you are in private sector, public sector, defense, whatever it might be. But I do at the same time think that we need to look at it from the perspective of it's again trouble, like it's solving problems, because I always try to look at security as a benefit, which
Mm.
is something that very few users would agree on because it's a hassle for most
Okay.
of
You
them,
got you.
the
I
way we
have to
have
do
done security.
what now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have to have a little
exactly.
USB drive that I've put my
Yeah.
thumbprint on. Like that's so much more complicated now.
Yeah, exactly. So I always try to get into the point that everything we do from a security point of view needs to add some kind of value or be
Right.
invisible to the user. And I think application patching is an obvious example of that. It's one of the most important things you can do to increase your security posture. If you always stay up to date, if you patch as rapidly as you can, then you have a much better situation than if you don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And that is at the same time a benefit to the users because they get access to the latest and greatest technologies all the time. And usually it's also much easier for them if we continuously patch rather than applying big, huge
Uh-huh.
patches every other 6 months or whatever. So
Right.
it's always around that point of view. So it's first and foremost, prepare for the worst because we are in constant attack. And I don't necessarily see the cloud as being better or worse, but it's different.
A
And the
different
main
battlefield.
difference, yeah, absolutely. And the main difference is that it's on the internet constantly. But the benefit of that is that we have others that help us protect that wall or that gate to our infrastructure. We're not
Yeah.
alone in that battle because we have, in many cases, the hyperscaler that helps us protect it, which if you compare it to most of the attacks that's currently happening, where it's like a NetScaler or a Cisco firewall or whatever it might be that is unpatched, because I rarely blame the vendor for something like that. If you get hacked due to a non-patched firewall where the vendor had provided you with a patch, it's shame on you, not shame on the vendor. But then you're alone
Yeah.
because it's up to you to do it all. So it's a different battlefield. You need to be aware of the different rules that apply and the different technologies you need to use, and that what you have been using for your on-prem environment necessarily isn't the best for the cloud. But here you also see like I'm a huge advocate. I work for a company that's very network focused. So they love VPNs. And personally, I'm not too keen. I've seen them create more harm than good. But where EUC is a brilliant way of doing security, which really helps you compared to a VPN, in my opinion. Configured correctly, you can do so many great things with any EUC vendor that will increase your security posture.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about that, right, is you talked about it in the context of the fact that if the vendor already provides a patch for you, it's your job to patch it, right? And you kind of talked about it from an application perspective as well. You want it to be small, meaningful, but frequent doses. I mean, you have this has historically been abstracted from the user, right? The patching process, whether it's for the workspace or whether it's for the application. IT just does its magic according to the user, right? They just do their magic behind the scenes, and then all of a sudden it's on my machine and my machine runs slower. That's the user experience that you have right now. But now what users are starting to see is, because of these, they're getting daily updates on things like their banking application. And what they're starting to see is that the frequency is an okay thing. Is I just click update all right before I go to bed when it gets to 100, right? And that's what that process needs to really look like. And I think that for us, balancing the security component and then, us for Rimo, that's why I'm so passionate about the automation, because the shame on you for not patching it because the vendor made it available is such an easy thing to automate and avoid so that you don't have to pay the consequences later. So, from a battlefield perspective, I do believe that a big chunk of it, Simon, is around getting the old mindset of legacy processes out of the like you say, security is not seen as a benefit, it's seen as a pain, right? The same thing with these processes. These processes are a pain. They do need to be modernized. And then ultimately, when we get to that point, we can achieve an experience more like the consumer one that they're used to on a daily basis.
And that was actually what one of the big parts why I became an MVP, because back in those days when Windows 10 were just released, a lot of companies struggled with Windows as a service. I still claim that Microsoft should have continued with doing 3 updates per year and just forced us to stay current as fast as we could. I still think that was a brilliant vision for Microsoft. And the only reason why that didn't succeed were because of IT admins being reluctant to change. That's
disruptive.
Also,
it's disruptive to their existing processes, right? Like that's the thing. It's either update the processes or update the tooling. And it's not like it's something that is low risk, right? I mean, I loved CBBs, LTSR versus current branch of business, N-2. I remember those days with Windows 10 coming out and revolutionizing it and saying it will be the last version of Windows ever. Because it's going to constantly be updated. Now, of course, there's 11 and now they've announced 12. But it comes back, Simon, to the point that IT admins have historically been reluctant because the processes just don't lend themselves to being able to adopt 3 massive changes a year. They just don't.
Exactly. And funny story, speaking about this, Windows 10 being the latest, I actually have a customer that have a recording of me waiting in every single meeting. And whenever I say, what about this Windows 11 project that we're doing? They play my voice in the Teams meeting or Zoom meeting saying, I promise that this will be the last Windows version ever. And it's like a session from 2016 where I stand on stage.
That's what they told us.
Exactly.
I was told. I had no reason not to believe. Right?
Exactly. It made total sense. And we shouldn't get into what I think about Windows 11 and the reasoning they've had around it. It's a great product, but it could as well have been a new release on Windows 10.
Yeah, a CBB, the next next
exactly.
feature release.
This is leading right into one of my next topics I want to go on is like when you look at the different changes that are going on in the industry, we're talking about Windows 10, Windows 11, Windows 12, Windows 13, 14, however many numbers they want to continue on, which is what we thought of as Windows typically was like, they're going to keep on going up a number. They're like, no, we're stopping at 10. We're going to keep on updating 10. And then that just didn't work. And then we have the huge shifts in the industry with Citrix, VMware, Microsoft, all of these different things that are going on. We have a rise in the partners like ecosystem where partners are becoming even a bigger piece to all of these transitions. What does that look like going forward in 2024?
What I hope and think will happen, and we'll get to the possible other alternative as well. I hope that we see that rise of the partners, that Microsoft, AWS, Google, Citrix, VMware realizes the value all of the other partners bring to their solution, and that they, instead of trying to be one native solution, benefits from the other things that partners are bringing to the table, and that they focus on what they do really, really well. So that's what I hope we'll see. And I think that we see it more in the VMware Citrix side of things, where they need to be really good at what they do to still have a place, and where they bring in other partners like yourselves into the mix to really have a good proposition. This is how you should deploy it. What I'm afraid of is that I see like a movement within Microsoft driven by customer desire, possibly even, to have one vendor to do everything. And that's what we see with like Intune Suite, where Microsoft is cramming in things that usually have been a partner play. And many of these things they've said they would never do.
Like remote assistance and stuff like that, right?
Exactly.
Where partners would come in, even a component of analytics and decks, right?
Yeah, exactly. And my personal opinion of that is that customers are pushing for that because they believe it's the best and they are willing to sacrifice functionality to have one neck to squeeze. It's one neck to squeeze or one butt to kick. I've heard both.
Yeah, I like both of them.
And it's like, yeah. But like, again, I'm an artist in this, so I definitely see a value in bringing in not necessarily best of breed, but best of integration. And where I think, again, Microsoft is really good at a lot of things. Focus on that and do not take developer resources and put it in areas where partners have done a really good job for a long time. Because what will happen is that partners obviously will look at other vendors and say, we have had a good relationship, Microsoft. Now you're starting to compete with us. Then we can go somewhere else with our amazing technology and help one of your competitors or do something on our own. So I hope that we'll see a rise in almost ready-made package of good things, like almost like a culinary recipe. Like you take some of that, you take some of that, and you mix it together and it's something beautiful, instead of having like a ready-made thing that you get from a supermarket. Sorry, Microsoft, for comparing you to a ready meal.
I was gonna say McCormick seasoning that's pre-seasoned is nice. Come on.
And at some points, like there are some things that are really good, but I do think from my point of view, I am a partner person. I prefer to integrate rather than having one big piece of technology which won't have the same focus in every place. So we'll see. I think we are at that fork in the road where we will either see Microsoft doubling down on the partner efforts or saying that our customers want first-party solutions from Microsoft. Therefore, we will do a lot of these things. And in that, if they do go down that route, I do think we'll see more acquisitions as well by great technology that Microsoft will integrate. So we'll see.
Samit, what are your thoughts on this same topic?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I think I'm not quite as idealistic and hopeful as Simon is around some of these things, having lived as an ISV in the partner ecosystem, right? But I'll give you a bit of a hot take. What used to be a broader ecosystem for partners with multiple vendors around management planes, let's call it, for managing physical endpoints and managing virtual endpoints and cloud-based endpoints, it used to be 5 or 6 different vendors, right? And there was choice. There was the ability to be able to say, I'm a Citrix shop or a VMware shop. What's happened with the changing landscape inside of Broadcom and inside of, Tibco and Vista is that it's actually split off the auxiliary pieces of the business and narrowed that focus. So Simon, I'm with you. I think that piece of narrowed focus is going to be amazing to be able to keep them doing what they do well. Because at that point, Citrix and VMware had gotten so big that they were starting to touching adjacent parts that they weren't necessarily good at. So I think whether or not you see it as a positive, less innovative, whatever you want to call it, the level of focus from an engineering perspective is trending in the right direction to become really, really good at the thing that they do. But on the flip side of that, what you end up having is they just become another partner in the ecosystem. They become another ingredient in the recipe. They're no longer one of the outcomes of the recipe, right? It used to be you had 5 choices of where to go to. Now you're going to Microsoft, right? And that's a good thing, right? Because they have been listening to customer desires. They have been putting out what they've done with Microsoft 365, they have the Office experience, the mobile experience, like everything that they've done over the last 6 years is fantastic, right? Like I was listening to Brian Madden and Sean come out of retirement for the Sonnet.io podcast yesterday, and it was great to hear them talk about some of the things, but it all lends to the fact that Microsoft is going to basically be your main hyperscaler of choice, your main first-party tooling. and the rest of us are all going to plug into that Lego set, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, to your point, Microsoft has been, we're doing co-development with them at Rimo, and we've got some big plans that we're going to be announcing in Q1 of next year. But the reality is, at some point, let's hope they don't go the other way where they feel like they can just do everything that's going to be good enough. Because we saw that song and dance with Citrix and VMware, and I know how that turns out, right? I think that some parts of the product that are best of breed, and some that could have been better plugged by a partner. And I hope that we're able to, as a community, drive those right directions and, figure out what the right prioritizations are for Microsoft and for the other hyperscalers, right? I mean, for that matter.
But I do think like that when you select your strategic technology partner of choice, when you are a customer, that will be AWS, GCP, Azure, or like if you are like required to be on-prem, it will be like, that is my choice. I want to do on-prem technology regardless of which brand it says on the boxes. And then you build everything on top of that. So going back to the Lego, like the base plate will be a hyperscaler. And previously you might have had customers that said, we are a Citrix first organization. Everything we do is to optimize our Citrix environment. I have healthcare organizations in Sweden that most definitely have said that Citrix is our main and most important partner, and we'll build everything around Citrix. I don't think that is what we'll see now. It's hyperscalers or on-prem.
And with hyperscalers, I mean, think about those use cases that you just talked about, right? Like, and this is not to be, I have a soft spot in my heart for all of my partners like Citrix and VMware, and it's not to belittle the accomplishments, but for goodness sakes, Citrix made in the healthcare space, they've made their killing on the ecosystem of Imprivata and Epic and being able to have a great user experience for nurses and for clinicians. But what happens if Microsoft comes in and says, I'll host Epic for you with remote app on Windows 365 service endpoint? All of a sudden, one of the biggest use cases becomes part of your first party vendor choice, right? Like there's a lot of horse trading that can happen that will be very interesting. But if people in the community drive the direction, I think we can find what that right balance of what partners achieve what outcome for the best of breed ecosystem around this Microsoft or whatever hyperscaler you choose.
And I do also think I listened to the episode you did with Vadim from Nerdio a while back, and I've always said that WVD and AVD, when it was introduced, a lot of customers and partners looked at it and, hey, we don't have a graphical user interface. We need to do this with code. And when I was fortunate to introduce WVD on the Swedish market together with Microsoft in Sweden, I was super clear to all of my competitors that were sitting in the audience, this is a partner solution. Microsofts expect you to build solutions on top of this. So take that opportunity. And in all fairness, I think the only reason why we have Windows 365 is because partners didn't take that up and did some great solutions on top of it. Apart from Nerdio, I think Nerdio is the company that I see that really understood what Microsoft wanted partners to do with it, and therefore they have been really successful. And when Microsoft saw that partners didn't drive the adoption of WVD and AVD as fast as they wanted, they said, hey, then we'll do it for them. And Windows 365 were born. And I do think it's not far away to do exactly what you said. We have Windows 365 today. We have DevBox today. I could see a DocBox. Here you have Epic. Go ahead. We will host
it's a Windows 3.
Exactly. Yeah. This is a custom-made healthcare Windows 365. And then we continue to do that because that makes sense. It's something that a doctor or a nurse or a manager at the hospital would understand and instantly see the value of, could try straight away, and they would say, we like it or we don't like it.
And it's bundled into your licensing, right? Like that's the other piece. It's bundled into a flat fee license. The thing that will still require work, obviously, is the ecosystem piece with Imprivata in a but like that's the thing. Like we're starting to see use cases where everything could drift to one vendor, and that's a little alarming.
Yeah. I think 2024 is going to be very interesting when we look at the variety of things that happened in 2023. We will not see the repercussions of until 2024. One last thing that I do want to talk about is like physical endpoints versus EUC, and then also SCCM and Intune in 2024 as well. Like what are we looking at those kinds of things that are happening?
First, let's talk a little bit about Config Manager. It won't go away. Every time I go to a conference and I see a session on Config Manager and I sit there and I feel joy. And I know I'm odd, but it's something with building collections and troubleshooting. And it's an amazing product that still do things that is very, very hard to beat, especially if you have big environments. So config manager will always be there. It's a constant. It will not be given any huge improvements, but it will be there. And it's something we need to get used to that it is there. And then we can cloud enable it if we want to cloud attach it. Intune, if you look at Security Copilot, which is now part of Intune, I think that really starts to make it clear for the broader community what Intune is. It's not only an endpoint management platform. It's actually the integration hub for a lot of security products at Microsoft. So Intune, I do see will keep on improving with managing all kinds of endpoints. I do think we'll see an extended management of Linux especially, and also an extended support for virtual desktops. It might not be the best solution for virtual endpoints, but it's a solution that a lot of people, like you said, it's 7 times more Intune admins than there are EUC admins, and therefore it's a logical choice for Microsoft to push Intune so that more people will adopt Windows 365 and AVD. So I do think we'll see that happening too. More focus on EUC, more focus on extending it to other platforms, especially Linux, and being more tightly integrated into Windows 365, and where I do think a lot of partners will integrate with Intune as the primary source of everything else that goes on in the security stack with Microsoft. So I definitely think that is what will happen. And I'm still very happy and very proud to be an MVP within that product because it's an amazing team to work with.
They really are. And we're doing some co-development work with that team and Steve Dispenza and all those guys, which has been great. The thing that's been interesting that you kind of called out is it's an integration hub. I've never thought of it that way, right? I've always thought of it the same way I think of SCCM. It's an endpoint management solution that lets you do exactly that, manage your endpoints. But the way that things have started being, and Nerdio kind of started that they threw the first challenge flag out there that said, you know what, we're not going to only be an endpoint management solution. We're going to be an orchestration and integration solution as well. So I will spin up your host pools inside of AVD inside of 10 minutes. You're not going to need to write this many PowerShell. So it's stitching together more than just like the functionality of point and click. It's achieving these types of routines and outcomes and processes, right? And Intune is lending itself to be that type of mechanism as opposed to config manager, which has historically been, I'm going to point and click. Of course, you can automate things, build collections, but not in the same way that you're going to be able to do with Intune, especially if you start coupling in cloud PCs, physical PCs, virtual endpoints, potentially cloud VDIs as well, right? You're starting to see that, and this is the approach that I take, so I'm quite passionate about it, as you can see, is that I want to be that integration hub where everything can be orchestrated and automated through our IP or through our platform. And Intune, if they truly want to be successful, in my opinion, in 2024, Sage, it's going to be 100% get people to cloud connected, if not cloud native, because that's the integration, the routines. Because not only are you updating your endpoint management solution, what you're updating is it forces you to update your processes to embrace automation, which you don't have to do in config manager and physical. So that patch won't go unpatched anymore. It shouldn't, in theory.
And that's something that Rimo3 is looking to empower. And it's something that we support in terms of like helping people to get to cloud. Like you're saying earlier, if you patch things consistently, small over time, you don't have to look at the big thing of like, let's update from Windows XP to Windows 11. Exactly. That is not something that you should be doing as an organization, but organizations are still doing it because they're only going to be there as long as they are able to do their things. It's that last resort. It's that last item in the checklist of like, okay, migrate to the new Windows thing.
Exactly. And I usually say that, and I think I said it in the session at CTO Summit as well. When I speak to users about their part of this, I tell them every time you update an app, every time you restart your device, every time you restart an app, you do a little thing that helps your organization, your colleagues, even your country, if you take look at the big perspective, to be a little more secure. So that's how you need
Just
to look
imagine
at it. When
your flag of choice waving behind you as you press restart.
I'm doing it. I'm a patriot.
Exactly. Every time you're IT department pops up, it's time to reboot. You
That's
look
so
at it and
great.
says, yes, when I've done this, I'm a little better person than I were 5 minutes ago.
That's so good. I'm gonna have you enable and onboard every user.
Yes.
Yeah.
When we've actually rolled out like a sys level hardened image.
Yeah, I've actually had that from an Intune customer once that they wanted me to pitch Intune to them, and I did. And the CIO of that company said, "Yeah, of course we'll do that. We want to hire you, Simon. Okay, good, job well done for a consultant. Yeah, but you won't implement anything. You're in charge of marketing."
Really? The
You are,
rollout of
yeah,
Intune.
exactly. You are the marketing manager for the Intune project. You will sell this to our users.
Every time you restart your machine, Sage, you're making RIT, our country, a little bit safer.
Yes.
Yeah.
You hop on the Zoom call and there's just the American flag waving behind you.
That's so
Exactly.
great.
Well, excellent. Thank you for taking the time coming on the podcast. Really enjoyed the chat and the variety of little rabbit holes we got to dig down in the space.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And Sage, thank you for moderating. Simon, thank you for being here. It was this one was a lot of fun.